Okay, hooray. Welcome to the channel. This is the last module in the CompTIA Security Plus exam preparation guide. So we've made it thus far. We've gone through the different 5 modules for the exam, and this is the very last. So here we want to consider data protection and compliance concept. So the CompTIA Security Plus exam expects you to be able to know what are those regulations, what are those laws, what are those standards that have to do with data protection. You want to be able to understand the different data states, whether data at rest or in processing. I also want to understand compliance. So what are those compliance, those things that an enterprise should do in order to be compliant? Now, the first part of the module, we're going to look at data classification. So what are those different types of digital assets that we can have, and how do we ensure compliance? So let's look at some of the very important ones. Let's look at regulated data. So here we're talking about information that is subject to compliance requirements and legal standards, such as data protection. If you take health data, for instance, most of those kind of data are regulated data. They cannot just be shared. They have to be protected. They have to meet the requirements of the regulator. For the guys in the banking sector, for the guys in insurance, for the guys in payment processors, and all of those guys in that niche, they must comply to the payment card industry regulation. So that class of data, most especially PIIs related to that, it's going to be classified as regulated data. They also have trade secrets. Now, most companies are going to have things like formulas, things like receipts or recipes, and business strategies on how they do things. That's why one of the things that some organizations are going to do is to say, okay, if you work with us, or if you're going to work with us, make sure that you sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. Make sure you sign a document that says, okay, whatever you're going to know here, whatever you're going to learn here, you cannot spill it out. You cannot tell our competitors. Now, because these are what? These are confidential business information that provides some kind of competitive edge. If competitor A and competitor B, or company A and company B one is going to be on top of the other, it then means that there are some kind of things that the company is doing that makes it unique, that makes it different. So if that type of data is being relayed out, it can compromise the system. So you don't want unauthorized disclosure. So those kind of data, you can call them trade secrets. Then there's another one called intellectual property. So most of the time, this has to do with patents, copyright, trademark, design rights. And they are mostly creations of the mind, or inventions, or literal work, or symbols, images. You classify these as intellectual property. You also have legal and financial data, things like contracts, things like legal documents, things like financial statements. You see, that's why handling of data is very critical. So you see some companies are going to have things like a threshing maybe room where they're going to trash those items, and they just trash, they don't just throw it away. They are going to use shredders to ensure that whatever data, whatever kind of information they have, especially very critical information, it doesn't go out, because this can result to litigation. This can result to things getting to the hand of the wrong person. So for data types, we can classify them as regulated data, trade secret, intellectual property, legal and financial data. Okay, is still trying to classify. We can also look at public, internal, confidential. We can look at it in these 3 states, where we're saying, okay, are there some kind of data that are just meant for the public? Most of the times they can be sent out through press release, marketing materials. Most of the times those things are going to be on the website of the company. They're going to be on white papers of the government. They're going to be things that you can easily go to the website and you can see them. So that's referred to as public data. So there is no restriction on access. No restriction on access. That's what you need to know about public data. Then for internal data, most of the times internal emails. That's why I had somebody in the UK that something happened within the enterprise, and she started complaining, but made screenshots of the internal mails, and somehow it made its way to social media. So that internal correspondence should not be shared because it contains sensitive information. Imagine they contain people's posts, employees' posts, that's a designation, contains maybe what they do, maybe their actions. And of course, this can result to competitors seeing this and having hold of that data and maybe using it for one thing or the other. So things like internal mates, company policies, they should not be exposed. You classify those as internal data. They also have confidential data. So this is personal, right? So highly sensitive information that requires strict access control. So this is explanation for that. So let's talk about data sovereignty and geographical consideration. Now, most of the times, because some regulations, some standards are going to ensure and say, okay, please, because of our national laws, our geographical laws, and how we want to do things in our country, we don't want our data to be taken out. Election data, data for companies that are streaming items or content that are not meant for other countries or does not apply to other countries. Geographical consideration, you're going to look at that when you are trying to release such kind of information. So organizations must ensure data remains within designated boundaries. That's why if you're using cloud platforms, you have things like different data centers, different points, you're trying to serve data based on IP address, based on the location of that particular person. That's why I see some streaming services are now available to some areas. So they could use CDNs, they could use cloud platforms to automate that process so that those access control can validate the user geographical location before sending out that data. They also have data sovereignty, where you have legal jurisdiction restricting processing and storage of data on some systems that do not physically reside within those jurisdictions. So there are some contracts, there are some stacks you're going to be working on. So it's expected that if you're hosting such items, if you're hosting such data, it must be hosted within a certain area. So that's what we call data sovereignty. Okay, let's look at privacy data. So PIIs, that's personal identifiable information that's associated with a particular person. It can be the person's personal information. It can be the person's financial information. It can be the person's social identity. So that's what you classify as private data. Especially if that is released, it can infringe on the person's privacy rights. Most countries in their laws, they have privacy rights. So people have privacy to their data. So such kind of data, like I explained earlier on, is what you classify as private data. Okay, so individuals have the right to access, correct, and request deletion of their privacy data. And this came into being in 2018 when we had the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, because most countries now adapted it. So previously on platforms like Facebook, Google, Instagram, that's social media platforms, email platforms, e-commerce platforms, you couldn't delete yourself over the internet. I think I wrote a blog sometime on the website and I talked about how to delete yourself from the internet. Now it's possible because by right, you should be able to say, okay, I want to discontinue using the service. Even banks these days, you could on the app, you could say, okay, delete my data. On most platforms these days, they have an option, and that option is compulsory. It's compulsory because by regulation, the owner have right to say, I no longer want you to hold my data, right? So every individual have rights to actually access. So I have right to access my data. I have rights to correct. So you shouldn't say, okay, I have so and so data, I cannot update it. Except things like maybe username so that it does. Even username at times, you have right to say, okay, I don't want to use this particular username. I want to be able to use so-and-so username, or I don't want to use this email again. I want to change my email to this, except that particular platform have a policy that states why that is not possible. And of course, if you sign up to such platform, you automatically accept to go by that policy. Okay, so there are also legal implications. You also have, okay, I talked about the GDPR is a European Union regulation, but like I said, it applies to most countries because these tech platforms, they have their jurisdiction, they have their systems and their servers in Europe. And if anybody is going to use that, of course, the person is going to conform to that regulation. And that's why most countries all over the world have adapted their own GDPR. They've domesticated GDPR. So Ghana, South Africa, US, countries that are not in Europe, Nigeria have it as NDPR, National Data Protection Regulation. Most countries have their own regulations and have commissions to be able to enforce that. Okay, so we have roles and responsibilities. So for your exam, you want to be able to differentiate between data controller, data processor, and data subject, right? So both roles are responsible for ensuring personal data protection in compliance with data protection laws. So we've talked about some of the laws. So you also have data subject. Now, I talked about right to be forgotten. So it is the fundamental principle of GDPR. One thing you can also do is to download the GDPR or download a summary. That summary, you can use it to scan through the important outlines, the important concepts in the regulation, right? So I talked about ownership of the data, then data inventories and retention. You see, retention is very key because regulations are going to have a way to say, okay, you have to keep data up to a particular point, especially highly regulated niches, highly regulated industries, areas like fintech, like banks. They are highly regulated. So that's why even if it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 years, if you don't operate those platforms again, you can go back and say you need your data. One of the reasons for that is because of litigation, is because of people coming back to come and say, okay, this was not the case, this was not the case. So that data is always protected. It has to be retained up to a particular point in time before it's not necessarily deleted, archived, right? So because at most points in time, you can easily come back and say you want to retrieve. And most times when you want to retrieve, you might have to pay a fee. That's why if you want, take for instance your bank, if you go to your bank and say, okay, after your account becomes dormant, let's say after 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, that data not like is deleted, you cannot operate that account. That account is being it's called dormant, or it's not longer available. For you to use the account, you are expected to say, okay, pay a certain amount into your account, write a letter, and they tell you, okay, wait for 24 hours. That data, that amount, those records are now retrieved from the system. So data inventories, retention. So these are very important concepts in privacy data. Then let's talk about privacy breaches and data breaches. So you see the word breach. Anytime you hear the word breach, it then means that data have gone into the wrong hands. Data have either been stolen, exfiltrated, data have left the data custodian. So when information is read, modified, deleted without authorization, we classify that as a breach. So when you say you have a data breach, that means data have been compromised. When you have privacy breach, that means all our PIIs have been compromised. And some of the consequences are reputation damage. So that's why you see a lot of companies are going to, there's what we call ORMs, online reputation management. So a lot of big firms, enterprise are going to have an arm of their CRM systems and staff to take care of ORM. That is customer relationship management, or a part, yes, most of the times customer relationship management. We work together with compliance they'll have 1 or 2, 3 persons, and at times they can have an array, or they can even have a section of their customer agents take care of online reputation. Because reputation management is very, very key. Reputation is perception. Perception is have a great impact on your customer base. So you see a bank, you see a fintech, you see a social media platform, something happens, they have a breach, they come out and say, okay, so and so happened, so and so happened, this is why it happened, this is what we're doing. That's trying to manage reputation. And that's why even if you have some kind of complaints and you get to the firm, or you send an email and nothing happens, if you go on social media, if you go on reputable platforms where you have millions and millions and millions of people, because of reputation, just drop that message, let's say on Twitter or on Instagram or whatever, you are going to be attended to immediately. Why? Because of reputation. Or if you say, okay, your account was hacked or your account was stolen or something, is that how this platform behaves or whatever, you see, you are going to be attended to immediately, because this has to do with reputation. But maybe if you just send an email to them or visit an office, you might not be attended to as much as you're going to be attended to if the company, if the bank, if the insurance company, if the payment industry, if the hospitals sees that reputation is at stake. And some of the other consequences are identity theft, because of course that's why you see some of these data being traded at black sites, traded at sites where some of these things are even traded for just very, very small amount of money. And at times, if this thing is discovered, the regulator can actually fine, because they are meant to protect this. Then another thing that the regulators will always do is to say, okay, anytime that something happens, you are mandated by regulation to tell us what happened. So there's need for public notification and disclosure. So it's very key. Now, when it comes to compliance, so ensuring that an organization follows required security guidelines, industry standards. We have compliance issues. We have legal and regulatory non-compliance. We have software licensing. We have contractual non-compliance. So these are some of the issues that can arise from non-adherence to some of these compliance tenants. So here, for contractual non-compliance, if a client does not adhere to what is written in the contract, we refer to that as contractual non-compliance. When somebody uses a non-licensed software, like I was telling some persons yesterday, that I always prefer to use the free version of a software or to pay for the license, right? So it's something I've developed over the years, because also we are vendors to some partners, we're vendors to some platforms. So it goes against fair use, goes against some principles. So, but when people use unlicensed softwares, of course, it could lead to security risks, it could lead to legal penalties, it can lead to a lot. I've seen cases where even copyright issue, even plagiarism issue, a company is being, a suit is being taken upon on the company because of picking up content from here and dropping here, using content that was not initiated by them and the rest. Then we have legal and regulatory. So for legal and regulatory, it has to be something that have to do with a law, like HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, and the rest. For software, it has to do with when the license was not paid for, or it was not used, or it was cloned, or reverse engineering was done. and maybe something that looks like it from the core of the original software was used, or you have issues where you have contractual non-compliance. Now, there is need for monitoring and reporting. So this can be done by an internal team or an external team. So here we're just trying to assess, we want to evaluate, and we want to report what we are doing. This is mandated by most regulators. They'll tell you, okay, what are you doing? How are you making sure that you are in check? So you can systematically report that. You can have that as billboards, as emails, as footer in your mails, as part of your website, as sending it back to the regulator. At times the regulator can request for that every 6 months, every 1 year, every 2 years. So it's just to make sure that everybody is in check. Now we have different state of data. So we have data at rest, data in motion, data in use, right? So I've explained these three concepts earlier on. Once you have data in your backup or your drive that is not being used or transferred, you call that as data at rest. So what you can do is to encrypt. Then you have data in motion, data you're actually moving from one system to the other, from one point to the other, one drive to the other, or through a private network. Then you have data in use, when you're actually maybe editing something, working on something, or of course, it's typically in memory. Then for data loss prevention, we can use tools or we can use processes to ensure that we don't lose data, right? We can use a software, and some softwares will have a way to be able to do that. Office 365 have that capacity. Okay, we've looked at data types, data classification, data sovereign and geographical consideration. We've looked at privacy data. We've looked at privacy breaches. We've looked at compliance. We've looked at monitoring and reporting. We've looked at data protection. We've also looked at data loss prevention. Okay, let's look at personnel policies. So in personnel policies, we're looking at the policies that concerns the individuals that work within the enterprise. So we just want to have some set of rules and procedures for managing operations, for doing stuff, right? So there are a few of them. You have the acceptable use policy, code of conduct, social media use and analysis. So because some people, we just work in a company, work in an enterprise, and they use social media anyhow they want to use it. So part of your policy, your InfoSec policy should include a conduct policy, and you can have a mirage of all of these or a combination of all of these, or you can superimpose them into just conduct policy, because this tells how your employees should use any of these items, or what should be their conduct. Clean desk policy. Take, for instance, you're using a system. So should you leave your system open? Should you lock it? All of these are related to the clean desk policy, right? Because if people can see sensitive information, or people can see access on files because you just stepped out for lunch, that can lead to a lot of vulnerability. Then BYOD policy, that is use of personal own device. You can have it as a BYOD. Then social media use. So what should you what should you put up on social media? What can you use our network to be able to do that? So you also have code of conduct. And of course, what's the level of acceptance of using our company resources, both physical and network and digital assets. Then we have users and role-based training. So there is need, like you cannot have policies, you cannot have information security policy documents, you cannot have all of these without trainings. So trainings should be tailored to the audience and the job roles. So people should be able to have different types of training depending on the needs, depending on what they need to know, especially when it comes to making them understand what is social engineering, what are malware attacks, because we say the weakest link in information security is humans. And that's why if the most sophisticated type of hack is not going to work, it most likely will work once humans are exploited. Then we can have different types of techniques by using gamifications, kind of do a game that instills social engineering trainings, phishing campaigns. It can be a link, the third-party tools that can be used, or you can just have some topics and talk about situational awareness, talk about reports and how to escalate stuff when things go wrong, policies, insider threat, password management. You can have all of these as topics and train your employees on that. But the thing is, how should it go? What should be the life cycle? So you should start from needs assessment. So needs assessment, you could have a form where you do a needs assessment on the individuals that work in the enterprise to be able to gauge their level of knowledge. So you want to know maybe who have a training before on password management, who is part of a team that have done some information security policy, who have done social engineering training, who have a cybersecurity certification, who have a computer degree, who have experienced the hack. You have some set of questionnaires that is going to help you understand your audience. Then you go into planning and design, then you develop, then you deliver and implement the training, then you do some feedback. After the training, you want to have some post-assessment, right? To be able to see what they learned, what information they got from the training in terms of what they are to do and what they've been doing wrong, and how they intend to move to the next stage by reinforcing the learnings from the training. Then you yourself, as a security analyst or part of the team, you want to do monitoring and adaptation, because you are going to do this training from time to time. It's something that should be regular. It can be every 3 months, it can be 6 months, it can be 1 year, depending on what the security management program for your organization is. So like we said, you have assessment, planning, development, delivery, evaluation, assessment, and monitoring and adaptation. So we just talked about conduct policies, user and role-based trainings, training topics, then security awareness. Okay, I think that's going to be all for this training. So there's some labs here. I think at the end of this module, I want to get your feedback. I want to get your comments. And if I get something awesome enough, we can start going through the different labs and some exam dumps for the 701 exam. Okay. For this particular lab, just to usher us into the different labs, so we're going to compile all of the labs in the study, and we're going to find time and start going through the labs one after the other. Okay, you have a lab that you can go through, like a training and awareness simulation, or you can do a lab that is like trying to discover anomalous behavior, an anomaly, something that's not supposed to be in terms of employees' conduct. So you have a sample here. So this is like a cybersecurity training and awareness simulation guide. So some of the objectives is that you want to educate employees on common cybersecurity threats. You want to train employees on cybersecurity best practice. You want to simulate real-world cybersecurity incidents so that they can have some kind of practical experience. This is going to also help you improve organizational overall cybersecurity awareness posture. Okay, so when we start the, when we commence the lab sessions for this training, I'm going to be going through most of these labs so that you can better prepare for the exam. Okay, thank you so much. And I'm going to see you in the exam dump section and the lab sessions.